Or...
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. And I'm also sending my slides to Maria Isabel as a PDF that she can share with you afterwards, in case you find what we're going to say here of any interest. Yes, I'm director of the Danish National Center for Foreign Languages, which I'll be talking about. But of course, my title here is taken from Hamlet, which takes place in Elsinore in Denmark, near Copenhagen. And at some point during the play, one of the characters says something's rotten in the state of Denmark. And you might say that when it comes to foreign languages and the state of foreign languages in Denmark, but the or is it also means that perhaps there are things that are also looking up. So I'm trying to get it to change. Here we go. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what education is in Denmark in order to help you understand the context that we're talking about. I'll then give you a brief overview of the state of foreign languages in Denmark, languages other than English or LOT, because English is doing fine. I'll give you a brief description of the work the center does to improve the present situation. And then I'll give you a tiny confidential bit from an analysis that we are conducting right now into what are the barriers that young people experience in terms of wanting to learn foreign languages other than English. And the last one is a mistake. Sorry about that. In Denmark, we have 2 language teacher programs, you may say. We have something that is called folkeskole, if you can see my arrow here. Folkeskole is the sort of unified school that all children go to, except if they go to a private school, which is much smaller in Denmark than the public system. But the folkeskole covers grades 0 through 9, and education is compulsory up to the 9th grade. After that, you have what is called gymnasia, which translates very much into high school. And one of the things that is an issue and a challenge in Denmark is that we have two types of institution of higher education. We have university colleges who train teachers for the folkeskole. The kids here then continue into high school, but the teachers in high school are trained at universities. So these 2 systems of teacher education, from university colleges to 0 through 9th grade, and from universities to 10th to 12th grade, have nothing to do with each other. They are extremely different, which is a challenge. At university colleges, for instance, if you want to become a teacher of German or French, you can't become a teacher of Spanish, unfortunately. But if you want to become a teacher of German or French, you have 30 ECTS credits, which is like 6 months full-time study. Then you have a whole lot of other things. You have pedagogy, you have a whole lot of other subjects, but you specialize in 3 subjects that are each about 30 ECTS. And it's very much to do with learning how to teach German rather than learning how to speak German. If we then look at the universities, the training you get there, you have at least 180 ECTS, that is at least 3 years, where you study German only, which means that you become very good at German. You also become very good at linguistics, at literature, and at history and social affairs. But you don't learn anything about how to teach. So we have 2 approaches to foreign language teaching that are very, very different, which causes some problems, I'm sure you can imagine, in the transitions between the folkeskole from 9th grade to 10th grade, because the teachers come with such different approaches and backgrounds, and the students are the only ones who move through all the circles. Yeah. So the state of foreign languages in Denmark, you have to remember, Denmark is 6 million people. I'm I'm afraid I'm not quite sure how many people live in Argentina.
40 million.
But a lot more, yeah. So whatever I say, I'll try to do in percentages, which should give you some kind of comparison. There has been a sad development in a downward spiral since 2005. In 2005, in high schools, 40+% had 3 foreign languages on their diploma, English plus usually German and French, some also Spanish. When we look at 2020, this had diminished and was only 4%. And since then, it has gone down even further. Why? Well, in 2005, there was a basic reform of high schools where you had to choose different packages. Before 2005, you were either a maths line student or a languages line student. And that has sort of disappeared. Now you can choose between, I think it's 18, it has now been reduced to 18 different packages that high schools can offer, and students can choose them. And if enough students choose, for instance, social studies and English at A level, then they always have Danish and history at A level. And they're only required to have 4 A levels. So do they want to do their second foreign language at an A level too? No, they don't, because that will give them so much more work, written assignments, written exam, and so on. Plus, they may have lost the identity of being a languages student or a math student. Latin, on the other hand, since the latest reform in 2017, has surged. It was 400 students in 2017 who had Latin on their diploma. The next year it was 4,000. Now, is that because they love Latin? No, it's not. It's because built into these packages is that if you have 3 languages, so then you can have English and German, and then you can do Latin at a very low level. If you do Latin so that you have 3 languages, then you don't have to do advanced maths or physics or so on. So when they choose Latin, it's not because they want Latin, it's because they want a good grade average. And Latin is easier to get a good grade than physics at an intermediate level. So that's the way that is. Another development that we're not very proud of is the number of university programs in Denmark in and with languages. When I say in and with, it's because we distinguish in languages, like if you study traditional German at university, and with languages is when you are, for instance, an engineer that also has German or Spanish as part of your program. In any case, from 2005 till 2022, the number of programs that deal with languages or have languages in them has gone down from 97 to 48. Why? Well, probably one of the reasons is that English has functioned as a cuckoo. For the past 10, 15 years, it has been part of the general discourse and the political discourse that Danes are so good at English, and all we need in Denmark is to be good at English because the rest of the world speaks English. Surprise, they don't. But in any case, that has been the discourse. And therefore, the idea has been that as long as you knew English, that was fine. So we don't need all these other programs with other languages. Now I'm into numbers and not percentages, but here is a little overview, and you can follow the development, I'm sure, of how programs at university have developed over the past 6 years, just the past 6 years. You can see that English is doing reasonably fine, whereas German has gone from an intake of students, this is nationally, so you need to multiply by 6.5 to get to Argentinian figures. German has been halved from 112 to 65. French has gone down considerably, but is also more stable than German. Spanish has also gone down considerably. Italian is down to more or less a third of what it was. Chinese has also gone down. These are the main foreign languages that are offered in high schools in Denmark and for which you need a program or a degree from a university. I can supply this or supplement this by saying that in 2022, the number of potential German teachers was 53 nationally. And you have to remember that all high schools in Denmark teach German. And many of the German teachers are very old. They're going to retire within the next 5 to 10 years. So we do have a problem. In addition to the small numbers, there are extremely high dropout rates in the languages subjects, up to 50%, depending on which university. And these are just the BA program entries. Only very few of these will go on to do a master's, and only some of them will actually become high school teachers. So out of the 65 here, this year 53, our guess is that about a handful will become German teachers. Why is that then? Well, maybe there's something with the programs. We're going to, in the National Center, we're going to investigate that next year, but we have a suspicion that maybe the programs don't really meet the expectations of the students. Maybe students expect to study German to become really good at German, to be taught the German language. That's not what happens. They have very, very few lessons in just proficiency. The present government has tried to alleviate this a little by giving extra money for extra classes where students can work with their oral competences. But that's perhaps one reason. The general discourse that languages are nice to have, but not need to have, that may also be a contributory factor. And then again, is English enough? We don't need anything but English. However, there is a need for foreign language competences in Denmark. An investigation that my center had carried out, looking into the production of teachers compared to the need for teachers over the next 20 years, showed that there will be a lack of teachers of German in both primary and lower secondary, that is from 0 through 9th grade. And there will be a lack of German, French, and Italian teachers in upper secondary or in high school. We also know from investigations being carried out by some of the major players in the industrial organizations that they do need foreign language competences. However, they tend to want the engineer who speaks German. Problem is, where should that engineer learn German when there is no longer any program that teaches engineers German? They may know German from high school, but then they goof off for a couple of years, have a couple of gap years after high school, and then they study engineering for 5 years. They don't remember any of their German. So that is a difficult thing to do. Again, the present government has tried to put that right by finding money to do a little bit of something on this. And lo and behold, it turns out that at our university here, sorry, there were 100 seats for people to have just a small course in additional German or French. More than 650 students applied. What I think is sad is that they should have realized this in high school, and they didn't. In high school, they didn't realize that they needed languages, but they find out once they're in university and are almost through their university program. Perhaps the law students want to go work in the European Union. They need to have French and German, and so on and so forth. Our society definitely also needs the competencies. Germany used to be our biggest trade partner. It's right on our border. It's our neighboring country. But we don't have a lot of people who speak German, not at a level where it is necessary. So we can see from investigations that German or the Danish companies lose out on orders because they don't have people who speak sufficient German. Germany, as our biggest trade partner, has been surpassed by the US, though, but we'll see how long that lasts. Security policy, as is very, very apparent these days. And if you think back to the days of really, really bad Corona, we were very grateful that there were people who knew Chinese and could actually find out what was going on in China. Just as now, we're quite happy to have people who speak Russian and can find out what is actually going on in Russia and in the Ukraine. All of a sudden, we need Ukrainian interpreters, but we don't really have any. So perhaps we need to not think so focused on who are we trading with right now, but also try to have a general readiness in many languages, perhaps not very big, but in some. We also have in our military system, we have a function called language officer. And these are people who learn a language in a really, really, really condensed time period. They work very hard and they can be sent out to war zones to translate. They are very much wanted by other nations who don't have this function. So sometimes they go work for the Canadians or whoever, and then they can be retrained to learn a new language, because then it used to be Pashto with what was going on in the Middle East. Right now it's Russian, but they can be retrained to a new language in 6 months. That's how effectively they are taught languages. With Britain being out of the European Union, with the United States having behaved a little strange for the past, during Trump's presidency, we thought that German and French would be in higher demand, but not really. But if you want to have influence in the European Union, you want to lobby for Danish companies and so on, maybe you do need to speak German and French, because you may have translators in the official forums, but when you're talking in the hallways, when you're out to dinner, you need to meet people in the language that they know, and so on and so forth. So it's not that the needs aren't there, but the interests of the students aren't really there. We also have some geographical problems. This is little Denmark over here. Right now, María Isabel and I are sitting right here, right under the nose of Denmark. You can see it's like a little man with a pointed hat and a nose. His mouth is a bit low, but never mind that. But Denmark is divided into 5 regions. And we do have some geographical inequalities. Over here, you have Copenhagen. You have about 1.5 to 2 million people living there. And then the further you get to the west, you can like draw a line along the back of this little guy's head. It's more thinly populated. But if we look at universities, the University of Copenhagen has tons of foreign language programs, from the big ones to the tiny little ones that I don't even really know about, but the very specialized languages like Inuit languages and so on. In Northern Jutland, there's the University of Aalborg. They only offer English and one little Spanish program. In region Central Jutland, where we are at Aarhus University, they offer English, German, French, Spanish as standard programs. There's Chinese, but it's more like area studies. There's also Russian area studies, Asian area studies. But if we look at the programs where people can go out and teach, we offer English, German, French, and Spanish. Region Southern Denmark, where you have a university here in Odense, where Hans Christian Andersen was born, they only offer English and German. They have shut down Spanish and they haven't offered French for many, many years. So you can see that if you really want to have the wide variety, you go to Copenhagen. There's one more university called Roskilde University. They have no proper language programs anymore, but they have language profiles. So again, it's not a very encouraging picture that we see here. If we now look at primary, lower secondary, so grades 0 through 9, in Denmark, there's a total of 1,600 public schools. With French, there's only 249. From the 5th grade, schools have to offer German. They can offer French, and then students have that throughout their primary, lower secondary. But when we look at these 1,600 or these 249 schools, these 249 schools, how they're distributed, 70%, and this is actually, again, this year it's even worse, it's 74% of these schools are in the capital area. Then we have 12, now it's actually 14% in region Zealand, which is close to Copenhagen. You can commute from here to Copenhagen with no problem. In the north of Jutland, you only find 1% of the 249 schools. Here where we are in region central Jutland, you have 5% of the 249, and across region southern Denmark, you have 3%. So again, the capital is capitalizing on languages as well. So this is a big whirlpool that formed the basis for the first national strategy for the strengthening of foreign languages in the Danish education system that was established in late 2017, because it was clear that something was rotten in the state of Denmark when it came to languages. The strategy has two main aims. They wanted more students to become better at more languages apart from English. So again, a focus on languages other than English, because English is doing fine. And second, the language programs need to be of excellent quality, and they need to attract also the most able students. There is a tendency of saying that if you're really smart, you need to study one of the STEM subjects. STEM, is that a familiar term? Yeah. Languages are for those who are not really all that smart, which of course means that if that is how everybody thinks, nobody wants to study languages, because languages are for dummies. So those were the two main aims of the strategy. There was one main overarching action, which was the establishment of the National Center. Yo, that's us. So as a center, the National Center for Foreign Languages, we were established in 2018 as the major initiative in the strategy. We were given a lump sum of 100 million Danish kroner. I put it here in euros. I don't know what it would be in.
Lots of money.
Yeah, and lots, not lots after all. And then we were given 5 years. So till 2022, we've actually now been extended till the end of 2025, because we've also been delayed in everything because of Corona and wada. But within the same sum of money, we haven't been given extra money. The aims of the center is to, very much like the aims of the strategy, since we are closely connected to the strategy, but we are to induce more students to choose more foreign language subjects and reach a level of high proficiency in more languages than English, and to enhance the quality and relevance of educational language programs. Our field of responsibility is all of the entire educational, or all of the educational system. So from grades 0 through university. We are an independent center. We are located at the two major universities, the University of Aarhus, where we are, and the University of Copenhagen. So in that sense, we're not really connected to the ministries, but we still answer to two ministries. the Ministry of Education and Higher Degrees, and the Ministry of Research and Higher Degrees, and the Ministry of Education. Like I showed you with the circles, they have each their area of responsibility, which again makes all connection. They have just cut it in a different way, because the Ministry of Education is responsible for education up until high school, and the other ministry is responsible for all higher degrees. So you have to, this system is cut in more ways than one, leaving gaps and gulfs. When I say we answer to the ministries, they have to approve of our plans of action. We have to do our financial reporting to them, but we are as such independent. Part of our money has gone to projects that people could apply for grants to carry out. Institutions and organizations could ask us for money to carry out a project. We can't support research, but we can support development projects. There's a fine limit, right? But some of the projects that we think will have a potential for impact in the situation or on the situation, and may also lead to continuous professional development, because language teachers are shouting for professional development and for courses. So some of the projects that we find most influential are the ones that I've described here. We have a project on language coaching in upper secondary, which appears to have helped the students a lot and the teachers through applying coaching techniques to language teaching, so that students felt very much seen. They felt that they as individuals were seen, so differentiation was sort of made more possible. So that's a project that we're going to follow up on. Then we have, in view of the need for the German-speaking engineer, we've also financed a project that has developed models for how to include languages as an additional competence in other subject programs. For instance, engineering, for instance, journalism. When we first started, I was shocked that journalists did not have any language courses, but they don't. Of course, if you're a journalist and you know the language of the people who you're going to interview, or where you are making a program, you will get a lot more insight into their thoughts and their living conditions. Then we financed quite a few IT or ICT projects. For instance, we've had surveys done of what language teachers did during Corona and what they have carried with them. We have financed a study of what do teachers do with technology at all. We financed a couple of action learning projects to try and find ways that you could work well with technology. And then we have some projects that work with virtual exchanges, machine translation challenges, etc. As long as kids don't want to learn German, they have to hand in something, they ask Google to translate it for them. And I think that's a challenge all over, as long as we do traditional exam tasks that leave themselves open to Google Translate. We need to embrace, it's like when the calculator became something that everybody had in their pocket, the subject of maths had to change its entire identity and so on. Then we worked a lot with functional grammar, which is a requirement that is grammar as meaning, grammar as choice, in terms of, okay, so if I want to talk about the past, what are my options here? I can use adverbials, I can use various past tenses. You have so many of them in Spanish, it's confusing. That is one way of working with it, saying, so what's the difference, and what difference does the difference between the different choices make? Which is something completely different from asking students to find all the past tenses and change them into the present, which is just a very formal and structural view. That's not easy for teachers to change into, so we worked on that. Vocabulary is also very much an issue in terms of, for instance, progression. How do you make students or help students see that they're actually learning more? And how can you best help students learn vocabulary? And then many teachers want to test their students, but in actual fact, not many people know a lot about how can you test, how do you test? Then there are some projects that we have initiated ourselves. For instance, I'm sorry, this was a loaned a slide from somewhere else, so skip the first line. But we have, because we knew that teachers wanted continuous professional development courses and didn't have any, we actually developed a program called Foreign Language Advisor. We can't offer it, but we can finance the development of it, which is a program across languages and levels. So teachers from both primary, lower secondary and upper secondary work together in order to bridge the gap we know is there. And across languages, because we know that what the English teacher does in his classroom is not the same as the German teacher does. And they never really talk to each other a lot, which could also help things for the students. So this has been a collaboration between universities and teacher trainers from university colleges, which we're quite proud of because they never talk to each other. We've had some municipalities involved in it, and we've achieved external funding for some of it. 30 teachers have entered the program in our externally funded project, but in the 5 municipalities, we've made sure that all teachers had a little bit of course material and course offers. And as of this year, the program has gone on without external financing, which we're very happy with. I've already talked about our investigation into the supply and demand of foreign language teachers, so I won't go into that. Right now, what we're working on, which we see is quite important. In general, we've been, ever since we started, we've been working on establishing data in an area that has very much been characterized by what people thought, what they had experienced, what someone said, which has not been extremely objective. And all these, I think, have also hindered development in the area. So we started out, as I said before, by finding out what do teachers want, what do they need, what is the need for teachers, yada, yada. And now we're doing a barriers analysis. You could also call it a student cognition analysis, where we try to see what do students think, feel, and experience in terms of language and language teaching. We have carried out about 235 focus group interviews, which is a lot, with about 1,000 students in all. We have looked at them in 3rd, 6th, and 8th grade and the 3 years of high school. We've had students interview them because old aunties like myself wouldn't get the same responses as 22-year-old students would. They were closer to the kids in school. Most of the interviews have been transcribed and much of it has been coded. We have now reached, we think, a certain data saturation. We don't get much new, but we had to have the large amount of data in order to make sure we could reach saturation. And also in order to say, hey, this is not, we haven't talked to 5 kids, we've actually talked to a lot, and the tendencies and what they say are the same. Right now we're analyzing these data, and there are very many interesting insights. For instance, a student who says, I think all we've done for the past 6 months is conjugate verbs. It is so boring to conjugate verbs. It's like food my dad had when he was a kid. It was a very Danish food, so there was some cabbage soup. And the cabbage soup on the first day was really good. The second day, it was a bit of, yeah. The third day, it was really yucky. And the 4th day, it had fermented. It's like that with all those verb conjugations. You need something else in between. And of course, if you ask the teacher would have done all sorts of other things than conjugate two verbs, estar and ser, for instance. But that doesn't change what this 8th grader experienced. And we need to deal with their experiences because that is what hinders their interest. Apart from analyzing or asking students, we've also interviewed management. And we have a conference on all this in late November in Danish, I'm afraid, and not online, but it's there. Later on, we'll also have publications out, but right now we're focusing on what we can say at the conference. And next year, as I mentioned, we're going to do an analysis of higher education students' expectations. We can't save the world. We're a small center. All in all, we are 9 employees, which is not a lot. But given the money we have, that's also all we can afford. And just for comparison, there is a national STEM center. They are 48, they have 48 people working full time. But they get more or less the same funding that we do. But on top of that, they get at least twice as much coming from private funding, from foundations of various sorts, because everybody wants to support STEM. But there isn't even one private foundation in Denmark that has languages as part of their aim and what they can support. But we work with tons of people, keeping the 9 of us busy. All the educational institutions, the language professionals and the managers, the language teachers associations, where we try to tell them you need to stop fighting each other and instead say we need to lift up the entire area of languages, not just German in primary or Spanish in upper secondary. We need to work together, all of us, in order to lift the area. We also work with the subject advisors that the ministry has, both for primary and lower and upper secondary. We don't have inspectors, as you may have in Argentina. Yeah, we don't have inspectors as such. We have these advisors that mainly work with what the exams are going to be like and so on. But we don't have that control institution that goes out and checks how teachers teach. Just as teachers are not required to follow up and do continuous professional development, which is also very atypical of most countries. We work with the ministries in general. We work with the principals associations, with the industrial confederations, with the Danish Chamber of Commerce, with the cultural institutes, and so on and so forth. And that is another whirlpool that we throw ourselves into. A little more on our initiatives and projects. We work on knowledge, pedagogy, and the promotion of foreign languages. We do surveys and knowledge compilation or generation, careers perspectives, because, excuse me, kids tend to not see what they can use languages for. And teachers tend to not have a lot to say to kids about what they can use languages for in terms of careers, because most teachers have been teachers their entire lives. So we develop materials and movies, and we have ambassadors to go out and do things. And the barriers analysis that I talked about, when we say barriers, the other side of that coin is, of course, motivation. And the conference is not going to just talk about how poorly things are. Yes, we're going to let the students' voices speak, but we're also going to go out of the conference saying, okay, if this is how they feel, what can we then do to alleviate that situation? We have a lot of strategic initiatives with regions, municipalities, etc. Yeah. We do events, an annual conference. We don't look like rock stars, but still. Focusing on, for instance, oral skills 1 year, barriers and motivation now. We'll have a conference next year with the other Scandinavian countries on feedback, and we will definitely have something on technology and language teaching and learning in the next coming years. The European Day of Languages, which I guess you don't have, but which is a European Commission initiative connected to what is called the European Centre for Modern Languages, where there's a lot of activity around September 26th, which is the European Day. We also work with building networks between teachers. We have an initiative that we call Up with Languages, where we send students out to high schools. We finance competitions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I don't think I'll go into this very much. We've already talked about, or I have, because you haven't been talking. We've talked a little bit about technology and what we have already done, but I'd like to draw your attention to the why have we focused on it. Well, in our surveys of teachers' demands for more competence, they've asked for more ICT competence in terms of not the button skills, but in terms of how do I use it in my language teaching. Secondly, we see ICT as having consequences for the appropriate and the logical content of foreign language teaching. Math changed with the calculator. Languages need to change because of Google Translate. So if this will have consequences for teacher training and for exam forms and formats. If the machine can do this, what is it we need to learn as students and as teachers? Because I don't think that maths is still doing all the things that the calculator can do better and faster. When it comes to the barriers that we are coming across in our barriers analysis, they come from everywhere. It has to do with the relevance of foreign languages. Why do I need it? The usefulness. What can I use it for? The content. Why do we have to just read Shakespeare during English classes? Why can't we do something? Why is it all, the English subject in Denmark is very much like a mother tongue subject, where you learn how to analyze literature, etc. But if we do it in Danish, why do we have to do it in English and in German and in French? There's something about the way teachers teach, the prevalence of the influence of exams on how teaching is carried out, a much too strong focus on grammar, which is not the intention of the official documents also. Progression, kids don't feel that they get better, so there's a challenge in showing them, but yes, you are progressing. There's something about teacher roles, and then there are all sorts of structures in which of those packages I mentioned can you choose, how can you combine them, how can you not, why can you not choose French outside during from 5th grade on, outside of Copenhagen, etc. And then there's simply choice, that the students just don't choose it, or they feel that they don't have a choice, especially outside of Copenhagen, where their obligatory second foreign language after English, which is obligatory, they have to do German because nobody offers French. And what you're forced to do isn't always what you want to do. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.
I've
very much.
spoken you to death now. I hope you're still awake.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Well, okay. Now should you turn it off?
Yeah, but I think that if you speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ok, bueno, me voy a poner entonces acá en el micrófono. Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Hanne.
Nada.
Thank you so much. Tack. Bueno, tenemos aquí una audiencia muy especializada, muy realmente interesada en estos temas, así que quiero dejar la oportunidad. Sí, mejor. Ahí está. Les dejo entonces la posibilidad de hacer alguna presentación. Fue muy completo, realmente impresionante todo lo que hacen. You work so much. It's incredible all you have achieved. But anyway, si alguien quiere hacer alguna pregunta, puede hacerla tranquilamente en español o como quieran.
No, yo he todo dicho.
Sí, ya dijo
No hay
todo.
nada que no he dicho.
dos cositas. Una, tengo amigos en Flensburg,
Sí.
on the border, and they have a lot of Danish students that know enough German for visiting this university. And I was wondering if you don't teach more Swedish as a neighbor language.
No, we don't, because Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes can understand each other. The young people say they can't, but that's because they don't try. So very often they speak, if a Swede and if a Danish young person meets a Swedish young person, they will speak English. But some of us grew up with tons of Swedish on TV. And when I grew up and where I grew up, there was one TV channel. So we had to listen to German and French and Norwegian and Swedish. But it is possible to understand. Swedish and Norwegian are part of the teaching of the subject of Danish, both in primary and in secondary schools, but not a lot. And yes, German is very much easier to deal with in the southern Danish region because they are so much closer to the border. But even there, projects have shown that children, where you might expect them to have German friends, they don't. They don't know anybody from the other side of the border their own age. So that sort of cultural insight and cultural togetherness isn't always there. But the University of Flensburg is doing a great job. You also have minorities. You have a Danish-speaking minority in northern Germany, and you have a German-speaking minority in southern Denmark. And that, of course, also influences on what can be done. If that makes sense.
Yes. And the other question, there were a lot of programs for Spanish. Why?
Well, Spanish, there has been an experiment recently introducing Spanish into 7th to 9th grade. But due to other structural changes, it has become almost impossible, and I think they're closing it down again. But because they had the experiment, they also had, they developed a teacher training subject of Spanish. That will also close down, unfortunately. But Spanish is very big in high schools. It's about, I think, 40% of the kids choose Spanish as their obligatory second language. One of the reasons is they don't want German. But sometimes they stick with German because it gives them an easier exam. But if they really can't stand German and don't see any purpose or point in German, then they choose Spanish. And they tend to like Spanish a little more than French. They tend to be able to see more usefulness in Spanish because they can go to Spain, they can go to Latin America, they can work with NGOs, etc. With French, they say, yeah, I can go to France. They forget about Canada and Switzerland and whatnot. But yes, Spanish is popular. Unfortunately, it's not always the brightest students who choose Spanish. We can see that the kids who have Spanish in high school, their general average is a little lower, but that's because they choose something else away. It's a negative choice rather than a positive choice sometimes. So they're not very enthusiastic about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there something in the chat? No, just a thank you. Yeah.
Excuse me, I have like a technical question for Hanne. I don't know if I didn't understand, but if you mentioned that, I'm sorry. Where did the founding come from for the National Center of Foreign Languages? Yeah,
it was a government initiative. 75% of the funding came from the Ministry of Research and Higher Degrees, which are the ones responsible for teacher educations, both the university and university college ones. And the 25% came from the ministry that deals with primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary. But obviously, we are doing a lot of our work in the ministry that only, in the area of the ministry that only contributed with 25%. So they think that they should decide more over us, but they don't, because the other ones came with the money and they are more freedom loving perhaps, and not as rule bound as the Ministry of Education, for obvious reasons. Yeah, universities have more freedom than elementary schools. Yeah. And of course, we're hoping to become permanent, but that will require someone to find permanent funding for us in the state budget. But we're not very expensive in terms of the general running of us. So we're hoping that they can find a small grant after 2025, and then we'll have to find some external funding ourselves. And again, if we can be allowed to do research, which we can't now. I mean, half of us do have a PhD, but there's something technical about where does the research funding go, and if we sort of, can we tip the entire balance because we do, yeah. But if we can do that, then we can also, it will be easier for us to apply for external funding.
Okay. Any other question? ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Si queréis, puedo intentar responder en español.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I would like to make a question. Is regarding the internationalization of higher education. I just would like to know if there's any connection with learning foreign languages. I don't know if you have any programs related to exchange student programs or double degrees or anything like that.
Yeah, thank you. We don't as such have double degrees, not to my knowledge, but we do have internationalization programs. And again, much of this is embedded in the European Union through the Erasmus and Erasmus Plus. I don't know if you know about it, but that is where you can do all sorts of exchanges, and you can swap teachers, and you can exchange students and teachers and classes, and at different levels. And every university will have one or more international officers that facilitate the exchange of both staff and students. But people are also very much talking about internationalization at home, because traveling is expensive, it's time consuming, and there's Corona, and there's this, that, and the other thing. So virtual exchanges have proven, or telecollaboration, whatever you want to call it, these initiatives have become more and more common and more used. And we're trying to also, because if you do these exchanges, or if you do telecollaboration in order to achieve students who are more interculturally competent. In some of the projects we've done in high school, or where we've had applications, it appears that the teachers think that if the students just talk to someone from somewhere else, they'll, by osmosis, they will become interculturally competent. Where we say, yeah, but you need to define what is intercultural competence. You need to make communicative tasks that will facilitate intercultural competence. You don't become interculturally competent by talking about the weather. So I don't know, Maria, if that was any kind of answer.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. As a center, we haven't thrown our weight very much into that area because it tends to be more institutional and more like a daily running, and we can't finance that. That needs to come from the institutions themselves.
Bien. Bueno, no sé si hay algo más. Ya hemos tomado una hora
Sí.
del valioso tiempo
Disculpa.
de Hanne. Realmente no queremos extenderlo más. Cualquier cosa, ella es una persona muy afable, siempre está dispuesta. Podemos escribirle, estar en contacto. Por supuesto, bueno, después la grabación la vamos a socializar para que si alguien quiere verlo con mayor detenimiento, es horario muy laboral en Argentina, pero lo vamos a difundir y le vamos a sacar provecho. Realmente, nuevamente, muchas gracias, Hanne. Ha sido un placer, un deleite enorme. Aparte has tenido un auditorio muy, muy especializado, así que realmente una actividad muy bien aprovechada.
I hope it made sense to you.
Of course, yeah. Entonces, les mandamos un gran saludo desde acá, desde las hermosas tierras vikingas. Vieron que gente tan valiosa y tan amable que tenemos por acá también. Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Hanne, gracias a todos los participantes y quedamos en contacto.
Y gracias para escucharme.
Muy bien, buenas tardes, hasta luego, buenos días.
Buenos días.
Hasta luego.
And then the recording will